Chapter 7. The Country Sells the Coast. For most of modern Salvadoran history, the Pacific coastline existed more as backdrop than as identity. The country's political and economic gravity centered inland, around San Salvador, where governments rose and fell, protests filled streets, and the long shadow of the Civil War shaped public life for decades after the shooting stopped. The coast remained important through fishing and small-scale tourism, but internationally, El Salvador was rarely associated with beaches or surf culture in the way Costa Rica, similar in many ways geographically, wildly different in the history that shaped its international image, had managed during the same period. That began changing slowly during Katie's teenage years, and then, under pressure from government attention and investment, much faster. At first, the transformation felt informal and fragmented. More foreign surfers arrived. Travel videos circulated online showing long point breaks with surprisingly few crowds. Surf camps appeared beside coastal roads that a few years earlier many tourists would have avoided entirely because of the country's reputation for violence. Word spread, not through official channels, but through the decentralized networks of traveling surfers, adventure tourists, and people looking for the next uncrowded wave destination. Then the government began paying attention. Salvadoran officials recognized that surfing offered something unusual, an internationally marketable image capable of competing against decades of grim headlines. While the country still struggled with gang violence, migration pressures, political distrust, and profound economic inequality, the coastline offered a different narrative. One built around nature, sport, beauty, and possibility. One that could attract investment and visitors rather than only warning advisories. That vision evolved into what became known as Surf City. The branding campaign that Nayib Bukele's government officially launched in 2019, though the groundwork had been developing informally for years before, promised infrastructure investment, tourism growth, and international surf development centered along the Pacific coast. Roads improved near major breaks. International competitions became more common. Government officials promoted surfing not simply as recreation, but as part of a broader attempt to redefine how El Salvador presented itself to the world. The ISA, the International Surfing Association, became a key partner. World-class surf competitions were scheduled at Punta Roca and La Bocana. International athletes who had never considered El Salvador as a destination began arriving for events and staying through the week, finding the waves more extraordinary than they'd expected, and the hospitality warmer than anything their previous impression of the country had suggested. Supporters saw opportunity. Critics saw marketing. Which is not an unreasonable thing to see when a government with a problematic relationship to democratic accountability is packaging its coastline for international consumption. Most people living near the coast saw something more complicated. The changes were real. Restaurants expanded. Construction increased. More foreigners purchased or rented property near breaks like El Tunco, Punta Roca, and El Zonte, a beach community that would additionally become internationally known for Bitcoin adoption, an initiative promoted by the Bukele government that brought cryptocurrency enthusiasts from around the world to a small fishing town that had previously been known primarily to the surf crowd. Young Salvadorans found work in surf schools, hospitality, transportation, restaurants, and the expanding ecosystem of tourism services connected to the growing international attention. For people in communities where economic opportunity had historically been very limited, this was not nothing. It was genuinely significant. A surf instructor's income, a hotel worker's wages, a tour guide's tips. These changed what was possible for families that had previously been living at the edge of what was economically viable. But transformation also produced tension beneath the optimism. Older residents watched as beach towns that had organized themselves around fishing rhythms for generations began reorganizing around tourism rhythms instead. Property values increased faster than wages in some areas. English became increasingly common near businesses catering to tourists. Small fishing communities found themselves appearing in international travel content aimed at audiences far wealthier than most local families. photographed and promoted in ways that were flattering and slightly alienating simultaneously. The coastline was becoming globally visible, while many residents still struggled with ordinary financial insecurity. The same Punta Roca wave that appeared in drone footage broadcast internationally during ISA events was surrounded by communities where many people couldn't afford to send their children to private school or own a reliable vehicle or replace major equipment when it broke. Two realities existed simultaneously. They always had in El Salvador. Katie grew up directly inside that contradiction. Unlike foreign surfers who experienced El Salvador briefly through travel, she belonged to the generation witnessing the country attempt to reinvent itself in real time. Not from outside, watching the reinvention as spectators, but from inside, experiencing it as the people who would be shaped by whatever it became. She remembered years when international coverage focused overwhelmingly on gangs and homicide statistics. Now those same international audiences were discovering the country through drone footage of surf breaks and volcanic sunsets. The contrast could feel surreal. On certain mornings, armored police trucks still moved through parts of the country while surf influencers filmed promotional content less than an hour away along the coast. Foreign tourists relaxed inside beachfront hostels, while many Salvadoran families continued navigating economic instability and the specific daily anxieties of life in a country that had been dangerous for a long time and was only beginning, tentatively, to feel otherwise. But for young athletes like Katie, the possibilities mattered enormously in ways that weren't abstract or ideological. International competitions brought exposure that earlier generations of Salvadoran surfers had never experienced. Sponsors showed increasing interest in local talent. Government investment helped legitimize surfing nationally in ways that would have seemed unlikely, almost laughably so, during the 1990s. She was becoming part of something larger than her own career. She knew it. She was not naive. She was 20 years old and had grown up paying attention. Chapter 8. Beyond La Libertad. As Katie Diaz's reputation continued growing within Central American surfing, her life gradually expanded beyond the coastline where she had learned the sport. Travel became one of the defining experiences of her late teenage years and early adulthood, not in the way that word tends to appear in profiles of athletes, suggesting exotic destinations and comfortable movement between them. Regional competition circuits throughout Central America involved exhausting bus rides, cramped airport terminals in various stages of disrepair, inconsistent schedules, and long days waiting under intense heat for contest organizers to call heats into the water. Athletes shared hotel rooms to save money. Surfboards were repaired repeatedly because replacing equipment was expensive, especially for surfers from smaller countries without major sponsorship backing. Katie adapted to that environment naturally because she had grown up understanding that surfing in El Salvador required improvisation. Even talented athletes often balanced training with financial pressure. The sport remained close-knit enough that people noticed who respected shared sacrifices and who behaved selfishly. Travel also exposed her to a much broader version of surfing culture than the one she had known growing up along the Salvadoran coast. In Nicaragua, she encountered heavier beach breaks and different competitive styles. In Costa Rica, the surf infrastructure appeared more developed and commercially mature. International events introduced her to athletes from countries where surfing already operated as a highly professionalized industry, supported by larger sponsors, stronger federations, and deeper financial resources. The differences were impossible not to notice. Some competitors traveled with multiple boards designed for specific wave conditions, coaches dedicated entirely to strategy, and support teams focused on nutrition and recovery. Many Central American surfers, by contrast, still operated through persistence more than resources. Katie understood early that athletes from countries like El Salvador often had to maximize discipline and adaptability because they couldn't rely on the same structural advantages available elsewhere. This was not a complaint she voiced publicly. It was a fact she incorporated into how she prepared. What impressed coaches and fellow surfers most was not that Katie handled adversity dramatically, but that she rarely used it as an excuse. After difficult heats, She often replayed mistakes mentally for hours, analyzing wave choices or timing errors long after contests ended. Friends remembered that she could become unusually quiet after disappointing performances. Not because she wanted sympathy, but because she was already thinking about what to fix. Her connection to surfing was becoming more complicated emotionally as the sport's demands increased. As a child, the ocean had represented freedom and excitement. By her late teens, surfing also carried responsibility, results that mattered, sponsors who paid closer attention, surf organizations that increasingly viewed her as one of the country's emerging faces within the sport as Surf City campaigns expanded. That visibility created opportunity, but it also brought subtle pressure. She belonged to a generation of Salvadoran athletes growing up during a period when the country itself was trying to redefine its image abroad. International surf broadcasts now showed aerial drone footage of the coastline that would have seemed unimaginable during the country's most dangerous years. She understood the significance of that transformation even if she rarely discussed it in political terms. She had grown up hearing outsiders describe El Salvador primarily through fear. During competitions abroad, she occasionally encountered people who reacted with surprise when she mentioned where she was from. Some knew almost nothing about the country beyond headlines involving gangs or homicide rates. Those moments frustrated her privately. Not because she believed El Salvador's problems were fake or exaggerated. She knew better than most people how real those problems were. But because she knew the country contained far more complexity than outsiders usually encountered. She knew the warmth of coastal communities, the discipline of local surfers training before sunrise, the fishing families who had lived beside the Pacific for generations, and the ordinary routines that continued daily beneath international narratives about danger. She knew the food, the music, the specific quality of Salvadoran humor that found comedy in situations so difficult that laughter became a form of survival. She knew what the country smelled like after rain, what Punta Roca looked like in the early morning light, what it felt like to be from a place that the world had decided to define by its worst years. That layered understanding shaped how she carried herself as her profile grew. The surf community remained small enough that rivalries and friendships overlapped constantly. Katie stayed intensely competitive, but most people described her less as intimidating than focused. She understood something many athletes eventually learn in smaller countries. Success carries communal weight. When a Salvadoran athlete competed internationally, people often interpreted the achievement nationally rather than individually. A strong performance became evidence that the country itself was capable of producing excellence beyond violence or political instability. That pressure could become exhausting. It also made winning feel more meaningful than it would have otherwise, which is not a simple trade-off.